Well, hello, friends, and welcome to The Healthy Christian Leader. I'm Dwight Habermehl, and I have an amazing guest here today, Spencer Conway. Spencer, it's great to have you here, and welcome to the program.
Thank you. It's good to be back. I'm very, very excited to be here, for sure.
Spencer, probably something that a lot of those who are listening right now wouldn't know, but you actually helped get The Healthy Christian Leader broadcast going a long time ago, about 4 years ago.
Yeah, it's exciting to see what God's been doing through it over the last 4 years, and very confident that there's a great future in store.
Well, listen, tell us about yourself, because a lot of people, listening right now may not know you. You pastor at Rock Church. You have led the youth ministry there and children's ministry. Do an amazing job of that. But God's graced you and gifted you and positioned you to, serve in the area of youth beyond the local church at Rock.
Yeah. I've been in some form of next generation ministry for the last 10 years, and I've served in my local church in all kinds of different capacities. I was, as you said, the youth pastor for a number of years. I had a number of years where I helped pioneer a young adult ministry that's continued to this day. And now in the most recent chapter of Next Generation Ministry, the last 2 to 3 years, I've been focusing specifically on the children's ministry in our church, which I've been really, really grateful for. Just the opportunity to see how God is moving in all different ages and demographics in the next generation. He's doing special things in the lives of teenagers and the lives of young adults who are in that kind of early college and career phase. And now it's been really, really special to see how God's been moving in our local church amongst the youngest. I've always had a heart for unity, and I've always had a heart to just serve the body of Christ, even beyond our own local church. And it's been exciting to see how God has opened up opportunities for me to just be a part of some really cool movements and some really cool things that God is doing in the broader maritime region and the broader Atlantic Canadian region. And specifically, probably the main outlet that I have for that right now is through an event called One Conference, which happens every year in June. It's been going for about 8 years, and this is a really, really special event that the Lord has birthed, and He seems to be using in a really special way to be, I think, a catalyst towards some of the things that God is doing in the broader body of Christ, specifically in the next generation, which has been really fun.
Well, and I've heard this year they had record attendance. How many were there?
Yeah, this year at One Conference, we saw over 4,000 people in the room at the Moncton Coliseum, and I gotta say, I've been on the leadership team at One Conference for the last, I think, 6 years maybe, and started attending the conference in my rookie year as a youth pastor back in 2018. And so it's been very cool for me as someone who began in its very first year attending as a youth pastor. I joined in a couple years. I've been able to be a part of just the journey of it growing and changing and evolving and watching what God's been doing. And to be clear, we're all very excited about the numbers. I mean, it's hard not to be excited about the numbers, but especially in Atlantic Canada. It is more than that. And the thing that I would say, as I just reflected on what we experienced this past year at One Conference, is there's a real spiritual momentum. And I think the numbers are a downstream effect of that. The numbers show that there is some kind of a momentum taking place, but there really is, and I've only been engaged in leadership in the next generation space of the church for 10 years now, but in the 10 years that I've been working with young people, specifically in Atlantic Canada, I've never seen the spiritual hunger and the spiritual boldness that I'm seeing right now.
Okay, so tell me about that. What does that look like?
Well, the way that I would kind of describe it is, so when I was in junior high and high school, I was always the type of kid who was very, very on fire and very passionate about my faith. When I was in junior high and high school, I was leading clubs in my school. I initiated a club in my 8th grade year, my 9th grade year. By the time I got to high school, I initiated clubs in grade 10, 11, and 12. And so I was always the type of kid who was trying to rally my friends to be salt and light in our schools and to be used by God in some way. But if I'm being honest, as I reflect on what that felt like from like the inside out as a junior high and high school student back 10, 15 years ago, it felt very much like we were doing something at the time that was met with a lot of hostility, that was met with a lot of resistance. And it kind of felt like, I'm trying to think of the right word. It was not common in the youth ministry spaces for students like me to be jumping into that kind of a missional outlet.
Right.
But what we're seeing right now, which is so exciting, and we're still in the early stages of it, I believe, it is becoming the norm among Christian students across Atlantic Canada to be involved in these types of clubs and these types of groups that are meeting in their schools. We've seen a massive surge of clubs meeting in high schools all across Atlantic Canada just in the last 2 years. A lot of it is through the Alpha Youth Program, but there's prayer clubs that are beginning. There's lots of different Bible studies and programs that are beginning. But what it is it's students that it seems to be, I don't know, something has shifted in them where even though there is still resistance, there is still some hostility in certain pockets, there is a passionate boldness where it seems like this generation of Christian students, they take their faith very, very seriously, and they don't care what people think about them as much as...
It's interesting. You know, I was at a public space the other day.
Yeah.
You know, and there was this teenager that came in, and very cool looking teenager.
Yeah.
And he had jeans on, and right across the knee where there was the ripped jean at the knee, like the typical thing, Jesus was
That's cool.
Put right across the top
That's
of
really
his
cool.
knee. And, you know, he had a cross, and he was, you know, cool in the way that he interacted with people, but totally open with his faith.
Yeah.
And a totally secular environment, but he was completely comfortable. And it was great to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing more of it. And what I'm dreaming about and praying about now is like, how do we steward this so that this doesn't just become, you know, a nice chapter in the story of the Church of Atlantic Canada, but how do we steward and respond in a way where we can actually see the ecosystems and the cultures within high schools and junior highs across Atlantic Canada. I want to see it become so normalized that there would be Christian witness, Christian presence that's not just inward focused, because sometimes, you know, these clubs can kind of become almost like an exclusive. We don't want that. We want to see a missional Christian witness normalized in every school, in every semester across Atlantic Canada. And we're definitely seeing an uptick in that direction. But the question is, how do we steward it so that this becomes, you know, 5, 10, 15 years from now, the normal experience of every Christian kid going into junior highs and high schools. They can know that they're going into a space where there's Christians on mission together, sharing the gospel, being a model of Christ in that space. And well, and what would those environments look like? I mean, back in the day when I was young, there was interschool, intervarsity, you know, was out there a lot, and we were part of ISCF in our younger days as well. So, what would it look like? Like, who's sponsoring these groups? How do they come together? What shape do they take? Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, like, it's going to take a different and unique look depending on the school, depending on like the students who are leading it. There's, like I said, Alpha's been a really big part of it, but I think the thing that is consistent across the board is that they have to be spaces that are student led, and they have to be spaces, I think, for longevity's sake, where there is partnerships from local churches. One of the cool things we've seen in Halifax is, for years as a youth pastor, there was groups of people that would dream about what it would look like to have this collaborative effort where we have our students in our youth groups meeting each other, connecting with each other, working together in their schools. And there was a lot of talk for many years, but no movement, no action. And now on a grassroots level, it feels like the youth pastors and the youth leaders are the ones that are trying to catch up to supporting all of the stuff that is just happening from the bottom up in the school systems through events like One Conference, through regional events that are bringing broader churches together. These students are realizing that there's way more of them in schools than they realize, and they're just leading the way themselves. And so I think that on a grassroots level, we're seeing like a lot of students lead the way, and youth pastors and youth leaders are the ones that are having to play a little bit of catch up, which is awesome.
That's the way it should be.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're basically supporting and empowering them in their ministry, which is amazing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So now you said something that caught my attention that I really appreciated. You're talking about building depth for a long-term movement, and really that I would imagine that comes through the discipleship of leaders. Now, of course, those young people will grow on into adult years and start going to university, leading businesses, professional, and start impacting communities that way, which is totally amazing.
Yeah.
But how do you see the extension and development of the long-term reach of this movement?
Such a good question. Yeah, I think for me personally, like something that I feel very passionate about is challenging young people who are specifically feeling called to the ministry to consider what it looks like to lead with longevity in mind within the particular space that you are called to. And so a lot of the times the kind of negative stereotype that can be attached to youth ministry or next generation ministry is, the short cycles that people serve in. You get into a youth ministry context and the average youth ministry term is, I think, something between 18 months to maybe 2 years. And so you kind of have these short-sighted stints of leadership within. And what happens is when that becomes the trend, when that becomes the kind of norm, it makes it hard to actually develop long-term vision and long-term strategy to really see this kind of movement stewarded and sustained. But I think what I would want to challenge young leaders who are feeling called to ministry is to really consider what it looks like to devote yourself to a region or to devote yourself to a town or a city or whatever the context is for the long haul. Because I've only been in it for 10 years, and compared to many other pastors, that isn't even that long of a time. But what I'm beginning to see as I've been faithful in a particular church context for 10 years of my ministry, in a particular region now for 10 years, I'm beginning to see that when you commit to a particular place and a particular people with long-term vision, all of a sudden you can start seeing long-term impact, long-term. And so talking about, stewarding an ecosystem or stewarding a culture where this becomes the norm in high schools and junior highs, that's not going to happen if you're just thinking in terms of ministry like a step ladder, where you're just serving in this position in order to hopefully get to the associate level and hopefully get to the senior level. It's like we've got to take a step back and really ask ourselves, like, what are we really getting into ministry for? Are we seriously invested in seeing the transformation of a province, of a region, of a town, of a city? Or is this just, a way for us to kind of get to the next rung on the ladder?
Right.
So you're talking about some youth leaders that will see the ministry to youth as being a stepping stone to the senior pastorate or something of that nature.
And just to clarify, I don't think it's wrong. Like, God obviously has unique callings and unique pathways for anybody who's going to be called to ministry. So certainly there's going to be situations where somebody serves in youth ministry for a time and then the Lord opens a door for them to come into more senior positions. But I guess what I'm more focused on is what it looks like to be committed to a region over the long haul. Because even in my long-term trajectory, I don't know where God's going to open doors for me, but even if I do step into an area of senior leadership or associate level leadership one day, my hope would be that I'm doing that in this region where I've already been sowing for, really my whole life, but particularly when it comes to ministry leadership, I want to be in senior or associate level leadership in the same region where I've already been sowing for year after year after year. So that way I'm building layer upon layer upon layer. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But sometimes I think as young leaders, we can get the itch to just, go where the grass is greener, or to, go to a place where, I don't know, things fit my, do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I do, because I think sometimes we can view ourselves as having a career versus having a call.
yeah.
And a call, is a call of God on our lives for a specific purpose, and it's investing that purpose in a specific place based on God's, assignment and call.
Yeah, I think of what Paul says in Acts chapter 17 about how our times and our areas of living have been appointed by the Lord, and that doesn't mean that the Lord doesn't call somebody to move sometime. Again, the caveat being everybody's journey is going to be different, but I think what I would want to challenge, especially young leaders who have been born and raised within Atlantic Canada specifically, and who perhaps have been a part of one conference or a part of different events or movements, or this groundswell that's happening within the school system. I would want to challenge young leaders who are from this part of the world to ask the Lord if the Lord may be giving them a vision for their life to be faithful servants who plow the ground in Atlantic Canada. Because I know this, the Lord loves to move in spaces and places where oftentimes, you study revival history, a lot of the times the Spirit of God begins to move in spaces that others overlook or others see as places where, aren't so special. And sometimes within the Canadian landscape, that can be the mindset that we sometimes carry with, our kind of forgotten corner of Canada over here in the Maritimes. But I think that with what I'm seeing, it would appear to me that the Lord is preparing the ground in Atlantic Canada for a very, very special season of outpouring. And if we're going to see that become more than just, again, like I said, a special chapter, but something that is stewarded for decades to come,
Yes.
which I think is how we have to be thinking. We need a generation of young leaders who have a vision to sow here for the long haul. And, I'm speaking into this from a very deeply personal experience, because I grew up here. My dad pastored here. My whole family was based in my church here. And to this day now, I'm the only Conway who is still here in Atlantic Canada. And there's a lot of reasons that make sense from the natural mind that would lead me to even consider, oh yeah, maybe I should go south of the border. My whole family lives in Florida. I think it would be beautiful to live in Florida, and I'm not going to act like that thought hasn't crossed my mind at times.
Sure.
But even as I have been trying to wade through my own sense of calling, I cannot get away from this sense that God is doing something special in Atlantic Canada. And if we are going to see that sustained and stewarded, as just as much as I'm saying it maybe to other young leaders from Atlantic Canada, I'm preaching it to myself. We have to play the long game. We have to lead with longevity in mind. And so I'm not just thinking about the next 5 years of my youth ministry or kids ministry career. I'm thinking about what kind of a church am I going to leave for my sons, Hunter and River, and my grandchildren who may find themselves living here. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Spencer, you alluded to this a little bit earlier, but tell us about how discipleship is happening inside these movements that you're beginning to watch. Like, how do you see this happening? How might you envision it actually developing and growing?
Yeah, well, I mean, I can only speak from like the specific context and spaces where I'm leading from. So I think right now what seems to be taking place in Atlantic Canada broadly, and I think that one conference as an event has a very special place within that, is that there is an appetite and an openness among the vast majority of young leaders. And when I say young leaders, within that, I'm including like students, so the students who are leading in junior high and high school, but also I think this new generation of like youth pastors and youth leaders who are kind of leading within these local church environments. There is an openness and there's an appetite for unity like never before. There is, I remember when I was in junior high and high school, me and my Christian buddies would get caught up in all kinds of side conversations and debates about the distinctives between our denominations. Nobody cares about that anymore. And I'm not trying to say that those conversations aren't important, but I often think about one of the scenes from The Lord of the Rings where, the enemy is coming in on them. And I'm not a deep Lord of the Rings fan, so I'm going to mess up what movie or what book this comes from. But the idea is this: the elves and the humans and the dwarves and the hobbits, they're all getting ready to be attacked by this massive enemy. And what has to happen is they all have to join forces together in order to stand a chance against the colossal wave that's coming against them. And I think that that's a picture of what's happening in the church right now. Is it's like we've got to stop our bickering and our squabbling about this distinctive or about this difference, and we've got to recognize that when it comes to the wave of secular progressivism, the wave of kind of all this crazy stuff that's happening in our culture, we don't have time to be bickering between Calvinism and Arminian. And young people are intuitively recognizing that we've got to rally around the things that we have in common. We've got to rally around Jesus. We've got to rally around the mission of the gospel. We've got to rally around prayer. And so I think what's happening is one conference, not exclusively, but certainly significantly, has become a catalyst within the culture of our region that's keeping things like prayer, it's keeping things like mission at the forefront of young leaders and young student leaders' minds. And what's happening is, on a grassroots level, this heart towards unity, this heart towards coming together. There's events and there's movements and there's all kinds of stuff that are starting all around the Maritimes that aren't formally connected to one conference, which I actually think makes it more beautiful. But in Fredericton and in Moncton and in Halifax and in the Annapolis Valley and in Charlottetown and Summerside, there's all kinds of unity movements that are just happening. And so I think that one of the things that we need to see happen if we're going to continue to steward is there needs to be a vision for young apostolic leaders to rise up and step into like an apostolic mantle, where they would begin with the covering and the blessing of their local church leaders, their senior pastors perhaps, stepping into, it's kind of like what began to happen in my own life over the last 8 years. It's like I was the youth pastor of the youth at Rock Church, but there was this regional burden that the Lord began to put on my heart, and I needed the blessing and the covering of my senior leaders to encourage me to obviously stay faithful to my primary assignment, but I needed the blessing and the encouragement from them to continue leading, not just for the sake of my own church, but for the sake of the region. And I think part of what needs to happen is we need to see young apostolic leaders blessed and even resourced by their senior pastors, by their senior leaders, by their elder teams, to have the kind of mindset that, maybe our youth pastor, or our youth leader, or our youth ministry, yes, there needs to be a primary focus on our local church, but maybe there's a world where we can resource them to be focused on stewarding stuff beyond even just our church. And if we could see dozens of young apostolic leaders blessed and resourced and equipped, it doesn't need to be something that is managed by one particular entity, but there does need to be that culture,
Mm-hmm. This is all exciting, and I think it's amazing, but my mind goes into the future.
Yeah.
What might God be preparing for the future? It's for today.
Mm-hmm.
There's always that conversation, oh, well, the young people are the church of tomorrow. No, they're the
Mm-hmm.
church of today.
Yeah.
And this is what God is doing in this part of the body. When you think about the church and its future, and the culture and its future, and communities and their future, what do you see when you see God at work in the lives of young people like this?
That's a good question.
What's the potential? Where does this fruit go in 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now? Because one of the things, Spencer, it seemed like just yesterday my kids, who are all now grown and having babies of their own, were your kids' age.
Totally.
And time just goes like that. What will it be like when, it's 10 and 20 years from now, and this seed has gone out into the culture and gone out into the community?
Before I answer that question head on, I would just say that, like, even as I've had conversations with some of my friends, we need to be clear about one thing, like, based on the state of the church and the state of the culture, when it comes to, like, conversations around, like, believing for revival, like, we need to believe that the Lord is going to pour out his Spirit, not just in, like, a sort of small little way in, like, a little pocket. We really need to see a sustained outpouring for decades if we're going to see a turnaround on the level that we really need to see.
Like a cultural shift.
A cultural shift. And so I think that the dream and the vision of where this is going is that from the bottom up, as the Lord pours out his Spirit and as the Lord prepares leaders to be those that steward the outpouring of his Spirit, we would see all of the types of things that we would long for as we study historic revivals. We need to see, I believe it's Jonathan Edwards that says that, revival is the acceleration of the normal working of the Holy Spirit. And so if, over the course of 10 years, churches have seen, just a small handful of salvations and baptisms and disciples added to the church, we need to see an acceleration of all of that over the course of the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And the hope and the vision would be that as God raises up young apostolic leaders who are able to steward this in regions and pockets around, not even just Atlantic Canada, but really whatever region people are watching from, the hope would be that from a bottom up level, we begin to see change and transformation and reform within our culture as a whole, as the Lord changes and transforms people's hearts. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, absolutely. And, I really appreciated your point about not just in this region, but beyond.
Yeah.
Because they're actually calling this movement that we're seeing in Atlantic Canada, but it's being seen around the world. They're calling it the silent revival, where, young people and young adults are coming into the life of the church, walking in off the streets.
Totally.
And it's amazing what the Holy Spirit's doing. So, Spencer, what encouragement, just in a few moments, would you give as we wrap this conversation up to those who are listening?
Yeah, if you are a young leader, it's time to go all in on what God is doing. So I'd encourage you, whether you are a youth pastor, a youth leader, a student watching, go all in on what God is doing. And if you are a part of maybe an older generation, find a young leader to encourage, to mentor, to pray for, because God is moving in our generation right now. But it is, as with every move of God, going to be started and sustained by prayer. And so we need prayer. We need people coaching us, mentoring us, praying for us. And so just say the time is now. The time is now to go all in on what God is doing. And so whatever you got to do that, do it.
That's right. And if we can't directly get involved, maybe we can open up our wallets and let the moths fly out.
Hey, there we go.
And put some resources behind it in our local community.
For sure.
So, Spencer, great to have you here. And we'll see you next time, friends, on The Healthy Christian Leader. Well, thanks for joining this conversation. I trust that you were encouraged and challenged by the stories and experiences that were shared today. Would you join us next week? You can find new episodes weekly in video form on the Aaron Ministries YouTube page and in audio form wherever you get your podcasts. Aaron Ministries is an interdenominational network of friends in ministry with a mission to foster healthy Christian leadership. Check out our website, aaronministries.com, for more information and resources and on how you can donate to our ministry and potentially start a healthy Christian leader gathering in your area. Until we meet again, may you experience the Lord's blessing, grace, and peace. I'll see you next week.